Welcome to the Immigration Therapist Podcast, a podcast for therapists that want to learn more about immigration evaluations and immigration attorneys that want to learn more about the emotional and psychological aspects of immigration cases. So, on today's episode, we are talking about the types of immigration evaluations. So, here are as follows. There's VAWA, there's asylum, hardship, U visa, T visa, special immigrant, fiancé visa, cancellation of removal, and N-648 form. So, what are all these evaluation types? Again, to reiterate, this is everything that I talk about here is about my experience in working with immigration evaluations. And in my experience, these have been the types that I've worked on. So I'll start with the first one. So what is a VAWA? So a VAWA, it's an acronym, VAWA, and it stands for Violence Against Women's Act. And this evaluation type is for domestic violence. A woman or a man can apply for this. And basically the purpose of this evaluation is to talk about the emotional, psychological, sexual, financial, physical abuse that happened in the marriage. VAWA can also be done for children of citizens. So for example, psychological, not for children, by children. So for example, there was this case I did of a father whose daughter, who was a citizen, she abused him emotionally and psychologically. So it can also be by that way. So even though I know it says VAWA, Violence Against Women's Act, it can also be done for men. Then we have an asylum. So an asylum evaluation is when an immigrant fleed their country of birth, and they fled here. They came here, escaping something that was going on in their country, and they came here to seek refuge. So there are a few criteria for asylum. But again, this is, the attorney would determine that. The immigration attorney would determine that. But usually it's because of political position, sexual orientation, religious affiliation. Those are usually the reasons for asylum. So basically the goal of an asylum evaluation is to talk about that. It should be not all the times, not every single time it'll be a trauma evaluation, but most of the time it will be about talking about the trauma the person endured in their country, which is why they needed to come to this country. Then we have a hardship case. It's called a waiver case. With the attorney, they're applying for a waiver case, but the evaluation is called a hardship evaluation. So a hardship evaluation is when, and this is a really interesting case, type of evaluation, because on this case, you're not interviewing the immigrant. You're interviewing the citizen, or the American resident. And hardship evaluations are about, listing all the reasons, emotional, psychological, financial, all the reasons why the citizen needs the immigrant in this country. So again, you'll be interviewing the spouse, the husband, the wife, or the parent of a person who's facing deportation or facing being remaining in their country, and they need to return or remain in this country, and they're undocumented. So again, hardship is when you are interviewing not the immigrant, but you're interviewing their qualifying relative, meaning the husband, the wife, or the parent. Sorry, not the qualifying, rewind, qualifying relative, That we're going to leave that term out. But again, they are applying for the the immigrant, the applicant. Actually, I want to make a little note about hardship evaluations. These evaluations are usually the most challenging ones because the citizen will have to talk about something that's probably not happening. Most of the hardship evaluations I do, they have to do with the citizen is here married to the undocumented person. They live together. They're waking up together every day. Life goes on as usual with regular stresses. So we're having to talk about a scenario that they are not living at, meaning we're having to talk about what would it be like if the citizen didn't have their spouse in this country. So usually, clients have a hard time connecting with that idea. They'll even, most of them will even say, look, I don't even know why I'm here. I'm applying for my husband or my wife, and they just said I needed to come to you, but I really don't know, So it's our job with hardship evaluations to explain that to them. Again, we're by no means doing the attorney's job. It's the immigration attorney's job to explain the case to the family. But again, this is why, as immigration evaluations therapists, we need to know what we're talking about. We need to understand within our realm of expertise. And it's important for us to explain to this person, the citizen or the resident, that, there's a possibility that they'll be parted from their spouse or their family member. And we need to talk about what would that be like and the stress that would bring and how that situation would affect them, their family, their household. There's also hardship evaluations that the spouse has already is already in their country. For example, maybe they'll go for an interview in their country of birth and they weren't able to come back. So now they're parted, they're separated, and, we need to talk about that. But those aren't very common. The most common hardship cases are when they're living together and there's that challenge of having them connect with a situation that they haven't experienced yet. So moving forward, U visa. So a U visa has to do with the immigrant being involved in some kind of crime in this country, and they were a victim of a crime, and they cooperated with the police with the investigation. So, for example, maybe they suffered a robbery and they called the police and they, helped in the investigation. I'll mention a case, obviously, without names. I mentioned the most recent U visa evaluation I just did about this person who was working. They worked in landscaping and they were, doing their lunch. It was lunchtime, and then they were assaulted, threatened, harassed by a person, and they called the police. There were guns involved, and the immigrant, they called the police. They participated in the investigation. They talked about it. They talked about it to the police. They gave all the information they had. So that's a U visa. When the immigrant is a victim of some kind of crime in this country, and our goal in those evaluations are to talk about the how the crime affected them, how they've been affected ever since, and most importantly, what did they do to contribute to the investigation. Then there's a T visa. So T visa is usually, it stands for human trafficking. And human trafficking has to do with either labor for work or sexual, human trafficking. So on this scenario, on these evaluations, we need to talk about if it's a labor human trafficking case. We need to talk about how they experienced threats and slavery and exploitation in the work environment because of their immigration status. For example, maybe the boss withheld a portion of their salary and threatened to call immigration if the employee said anything, if they ever, called the police. Now, human trafficking for sexual reasons. If the immigrant has been enslaved due to sexual reasons. So the goal is to talk about how the threats, the exploitation affected them psychologically, physically, what happened, and how they've been affected ever since. Then we have a special immigrant, Department of Justice, DOJ special immigrant case. So these evaluations, the ones I've done, had to do with minor children that were unaccompanied minor children that crossed into this country. So in these evaluations, they're not as common, but I've done a few of them. So special immigrant has to do, again, with unaccompanied minors that crossed into the country. And we talk about, on these evaluations, we talk about why they moved here, why they had to cross into this country, why they can't go back to their country, meaning it would be unsafe for them to return to their parents, either because their parents are neglectful or abusive, or maybe they're deceased. So meaning we have to talk about why returning to their country is not an option. And obviously all the trauma they've endured. So this is absolutely a trauma evaluation. Because again, when we're dealing with minors separated from a caregiver, that's always trauma. For those therapists that are familiar with the attachment theory, that's a good place to start in understanding the psychological, emotional aspects of children being separated, abruptly separated, and going through the trauma of crossing into the United States. Then we have a fiancé visa. I've probably done 2 or 3 of these because these are so not very common, but nevertheless, I still did them. So fiancé visa has to do with an American citizen who's here in the United States. They're from here, obviously, and they want to bring their fiancé to this country. So there's something called the fiancé visa for that purpose. They have to bring their fiancé to this country. They actually have to await immigration's answer and approval for the fiancé to come to this country. So usually these evaluations have to do with the difficulties, the loneliness, the emotional, psychological, financial hardship that the citizen is experiencing by being away from their fiancé. Meaning basically, why is immigration taking so long? They're experiencing, how are they suffering because immigration's taking so long, basically. Then we have cancellation of removal. So cancellation of removal, for some reason, these are one of my favorites to conduct. Cancellation of removal evaluations are super complex, super complex. Usually cancellation of removal evaluations have to do with very, very urgent cases. The attorney, the family needs the evaluation for like yesterday. The immigrant might already be detained, awaiting deportation at any moment at a detention center. And you conduct the immigration evaluation for cancellation of removal is because, the attorney is trying to cancel their deportation. And that's as much as I can talk about it, because again, I'm not an attorney. But in this case, you interview all the family members that are citizens that would be impacted if the immigrant would be deported. So again, this is very complex because sometimes these families are composed of like 3 kids, 4 kids, and then there's the wife, and some attorneys might ask you to do the evaluation for the spouse as well. So this type of evaluation has to do with, it's similar to hardship, but the person is already at an urgent situation, meaning the immigrant is already in an urgent situation where they might be deported at any point. So you're going to see a higher level of trauma, a higher level of acute symptoms in the family members. And in this case, you have to be very, very knowledgeable very knowledgeable, very aware, very, I can't think of any other word than knowledgeable. You just have to really know what you're doing, because these cases, again, there's the urgency factor, there's the trauma, acute symptoms factors. You have to be in communication with the attorney, because sometimes the attorney won't tell the family if they only need one evaluation versus the entire family. So cancellation of removal evaluations are super complex and totally doable. And they were one of my favorites, actually. And then finally, we have an N648. I'll probably do another episode on just this alone, because for an N648, it's a form that you fill out. For this, I really do think we need a full episode. But just kind of touch up a little bit on it. An N648 form is a form that you fill out to explain the disability that the already green card holder has that would prevent them from passing their civics test for citizenship. Meaning, so those of you, for example, that might not be aware, in order to become a citizen in this country, you go through, and you weren't born here, you have to first go through the process of obtaining a green card. Then you apply for citizenship after some time, after the time that you're, that's part of waiting. That's part of the case. So in order to become a citizen, you, as an adult, you have to go through this process of passing a test. It's called the civics part of the test. I went through it myself. I remember it very distinctively. It was a few years ago, several years ago, actually. And it's very honorable. You go and you take this test, and then after you pass, they call you in again for the oath, and you pledge allegiance, and you're given a flag. It's very, very honorable, very prestigious, in my opinion, for an immigrant, because that's like, it's making it official that you've become an American citizen. I mean, it's truly an accomplishment. Unfortunately, some people can't really take the test. They just can't really memorize, or they have some type of cognitive dysfunction or impairment, and they can't study or memorize or retain the information needed to pass this written and oral test that's part of the citizenship application. So an N648, it's called the form that immigration wants medical providers to fill out. And in order to submit the disability, request and the waiver to avoid doing that part of the test. So you fill that out. It used to be 9 pages. Now it's 5 pages. So thankfully they've cut it short. And that has to be but signed by a medical doctor, either a psychologist, a PhD or PsyD level, or an actual medical doctor. Again, I'll talk more about this on a different episode, but that's basically what an N648 form is. So those are all the immigration evaluation types that I've done thus far. And hopefully that shed a little bit of light into all the types of immigration evaluations that there are. So if you want more information, you can find us on social media. You can find me on Instagram at immigration_evaluations_center. See you on the next one.